First of all, welcome to the ILC Home webinar. I'm sure this is number 25. I don't know whether I count that right every week. And it's great to be with you all. First of all, a big shout out to our corporate partners with like whom we develop CoreLogic, Carpenters, iCab, the Innovation Group, and SiteCall. Thank you very much for your support. But I guess mostly it's thanks to all the people that tune in and listen and working. The interaction, the emails we're getting from you all is fantastic, looking at subjects, commenting and LinkedIn posts by some of the panelists that I've done afterwards. It was excellent, really. A couple of quick plugs. We are waiting clarification on a number of things, but our home building conference, the 1st to 10th, it still looks okay. We've got it in a much larger room with good social distancing, so that should be the 1st of October. Any updates on that will be in communication with you shortly. And also our home claims week, ILC Home Claims Week, which is going to be from November the 10th to 13th online, with one specialist subject every day, a light-hearted podcast in the morning, and we're looking at how we can get people working, etc. So watch this space for that. If you're interested in becoming and adding to one of the sponsors we've already got, contact Nick at iloveclaims.com or myself at iloveclaims.com. We're really looking for that. It's going to be a very special event. Today, I guess, we all know that ILC Home's built and claims people. We're here to talk about the things that really matter. We have to keep revisiting things because there are lots of changes. We know the government has announced change last night, and we wait to see all of the implications of that. But today, we're going to take what we do is a pretty regular look at what's happening in the current position. Have our claims progressing? Are they still coming in as normal, or have they returned to coming in as normal? A while ago, the last time we looked at this, there were claims going in, but they weren't all passing through to suppliers at that time for very understandable reasons. Take a look at that. We're going to see what the numbers look like, how it's going for the suppliers, how is the process coping with this? Are the life cycles changing from area to area as we see different geographical pressure put on the pandemic, etc. So, there's no wrongs. We've got a great panel to discuss it today, so welcome back to all three. Ian Marsh, who's Head of Property Claims at the Underwriters for Saga, Chris Hall, Managing Director at Questgates, and Jeremy Sykes, the Managing Director at Polygon UK. Everybody's views are their own, including mine, I think. I try to express many. There's questions and chats at the bottom of the page, which you can look and see, and of course, if for anything you get interrupted watching this will be recorded on ILC website, full recorded tomorrow. So if you want to forward that to anybody else or tell anybody else about it, please do so. For anything else, just give me a shout. Quite happy with that. So let's start, I guess with Ian's first question. What are the current level of claims coming in at ethanol stage? Are they as they should be for this time of year, or are we still seeing something a little different?
Yeah, I think we are seeing things a little bit differently. Trying to understand, I've looked at some data this morning, and obviously I've had a chat with our actuaries as well to fully understand. We got a bit of a skew because obviously we've actually just had 2 windstorm events come through, and we've actually had some summer storms come through as well, so it's actually a little bit difficult. But if you look at the underlying new claims coming through, they are returning to BAU. I think one of the things that we're seeing is that when we actually just look at the frequency of claims, we are seeing a different metric. It is changing. We're seeing a reduction in theft claims. We're also seeing a reduction in escape of water claims, which is quite unusual. We're seeing a little increase in fire claims. Now, that isn't fires within properties, unfortunately. Our customers seem to be having a lot of bonfires at the moment, and they do seem to be going a little bit out of control, and obviously, spreading to buildings, etc. And I think, obviously, looking at severity, or we're looking at the cost side of it, again, we are seeing a reduction in escape of water claims, theft, and also AD claims. Again, AD claims, it's the metric, they are changing. So the normal things that we would have got claims through for sort of like loss of jewellery, bits and pieces like this, which have got quite a high value, it is changing. It's more to do with carpets, televisions, and things like this. Small increase in cost on fire claims, but that's just really down to the frequency. As I said before, and we are getting some more smaller claims coming through the door at the moment. Going forward, obviously, with regards to August, we've had a look at that. we're getting more impact claims. Now, that could just be where customers are getting back on the road again. So that's obviously customers and third parties. So we've got more people out on the roads. And I think we've all seen that, especially when you go out now at 5 o'clock, it does seem to be just like normal traffic on the roads. You know, the normal queues are appearing, which obviously during the actual lockdown period did stop or did slow down quite a lot. So BAU on new claims coming through the door, but the metric of the peril is changing.
That's interesting. Chris, from your angle, you get them coming through claims that would be sent to loss adjusters. What are you saying? Are you saying, first of all, the numbers that you would normally see and to your view on the matrix and the type of claims that you're getting through?
Yeah, I think it does depend on the type of claims you're dealing with. If you split it from our point of view, we're business-wise split between first-party claims, third-party claims, and what I would call specialist claims. On the first-party property claims, I'd agree with Ian, that's pretty much exactly what we're seeing. The one thing we're not seeing yet, and everyone's predicting, is kind of the fraud impact. It is there, but it's not. We're not seeing any massive increase in it that was being predicted. We've obviously got quite a lot of business interruption claims, which we've been instructed on, but they're not proceeding, waiting the FCA decision. So that will have a big impact on work volumes. On a third-party side of things, motor volumes are only back up to about 70% of norm. Liability, because we deal a lot of pub claims and retailers, they're back up to about 80% of norm. Again, agreeing with Ian, we have a separate business that deals with third-party property damage claims, and they're actually running slightly above norm. Whether that is the traffic's back on the road or people have become worse drivers because they haven't been driving, I don't know, but there's certainly an increase on that. And then in our specialist areas, environmental obviously carried on, whether there was a lockdown or not. Tanks will leak because they failed or because delivery or whatever. We have a business that deals with sport, entertainment, contingency, and obviously cancellation was just about everything. Once the lockdown came, and we're now running into a period where things haven't been arranged, so there aren't cancellation cover, so you'd expect them to reduce. But again, you've got specialist things coming up because film and TV are back into production, but having to work in unusual conditions. So it varies, but generally I would say volumes are pretty much back to what they were.
Just as a quick one, you mentioned the environmental claims and the spills. We had, for those that don't know, we had a webinar on that last week, which actually got a fantastic reaction from those involved in the environmental issues. So if you want to have a look at the webinar section of the I Love Claims website at iloveclaims.com as well. I think one of the people was on it as well. Jeremy, over to you. Ian's mentioned, as Chris, a lot of the type of claims, which is great information, and I know that you in particular amongst suppliers are somebody who's dead keen to get that sort of level of information somewhere through in home claims. But how have you seen it from the sort of claims that Polygon get? Is it going back to normal? Are the increase in fire claims having a positive impact on you? Because that's probably a bit of a price that you generally sit at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those claims that obviously Ian was referring to are absolutely in the sweet spot of what we spend our time doing. And from the days of April being sort of 50% down, really for the last 2 months, we have been back at BAU, but I would say that it's been pretty varied across different insurers, and I guess that depends on the book and where those customers are perhaps too. But certainly now we're at, I'd say, above BAU in terms of regular escape of water claims. Fire claims, because they tend to be fairly small in volume but quite large in value, quite difficult to tell about volumes from our perspective. But generally, from most of the insurers we deal with, they are pretty much back at BAU as far as we can see. We've certainly seen a difference though between some insurers. Some insurers are definitely have got higher than BAU escape of water claims, and some are definitely still lower. So it is a real mix. And I guess the thing that's thrown more into that from our perspective is the Storm Ellen that happened very recently, and a load of flood claims hitting the system too, which have hit some insurers a lot and some not at all. And obviously it all depends where the book is and where the people are. But that was hitting the eastern part of Scotland from Edinburgh up to Aberdeen, and then mid Wales, and then right down in the southwest as well. So there's been, over this period of the lockdown period, we've had the best part of 2,000 flood claims to deal with on top of all of this.
Interesting. For Ian, from the stats that you're looking at, and you've got sort of BAU was the difference, I guess, what it is. However, in general, are they going through to all suppliers, or content suppliers get the same, or builders, or disaster recovery companies getting the same, or loss adjusters getting the same? From all aspects, are the supply chain still being fed as you would expect them to be under business as usual?
I think the scenario here, and I think we just really go back to the comments that I made with regards to the actual frequency. I think where you've actually got a supplier who actually provides quite a breadth of different services to the insurance industry, probably I would have thought that most of their instructions are back to BAU. Having a look at some stats I've looked at, it's those people that potentially sort of provide some sort of specialist service. I'm thinking about, as we've had quite a drop of theft claims. So, those suppliers who specialise in dealing with theft losses, like things like jewellery, etc. We're probably around about 50 to 75% when we're nowhere near back to BAU. But obviously, when you talk to the suppliers that, again, as I said, actually provide quite a breadth of services, you're tending to find out that obviously some of the claims coming through now, especially obviously with the floods, etc., that's sort of counteracting the actual drop of instructions that they're getting in other areas of the business. So with regards to the supply chain, yeah, we are actually sending the same volume of claims to our supply chain as we did this time last year, but it's the actual peril, it's the metric of the peril that's changed. And obviously some of those very specialist people, other than escape of oil, which is obviously going to be becoming more prevalent as we go into winter, because they will be filling up their tanks every twice a year rather than once a year. So BAU across the board, but obviously there are certain suppliers that probably have seen quite a drop and still have that drop while we're still actually sort of coming out of lockdown.
Okay, so Chris, in that aspect, you as a loss adjuster and the type of loss adjusters you might have quite a widespread of business, as you explained a few minutes ago. But you've still got to have people in your supply chain somewhere ready to do it. So have you concern over some of the more specialist aspects of your supply chain that Ian might be indicating aren't seeing business as usual just now, and how you over the coming months?
It depends, again, taking Ian's point, depends on the type of service that you're providing. I mean, I think you've got the pre-COVID situation on the fact that there was a move towards a lot more cash settlement than putting things down a supply chain route anyway. And I think that's a trend that's continued. When you're looking at the likes of drying out, for example, that's not something you would look to cash settle. You would normally look to get that done, quickly by the right supplier. So I would expect that would support Jeremy's comments about similar work, coming through. I would suspect that on general building contracts, allowing for the fact that you have other factors coming into play, people going on holiday and coming back and then not being able to have tradesmen in the house. The fact that they're home working or furloughed might well mean that if it's things like decoration, they will do it themselves rather than want the contractor. So you'll have less of that type of work, but general work going through to contractors, the same, but you've got to watch a little bit where backlogs have built up. So you've got repairs that couldn't go ahead during lockdown. You've got repairs that haven't been able to go ahead because of people not wanting things in the house. So again, you've got to look at the fact of, if you're going to employ a supplier, are they going to be able to attend and do the repair quite quickly? So I think looking at numbers, what's going through to suppliers is not that much different as a percentage, but I think it's probably a different mix rather than the whole repair going to the supplier. It might just be part of it.
Okay. That in itself causes problems, but Jeremy, there are other issues that supply. So what if you're doing okay and halfway through a job and suddenly it's in one of the areas which is locked down again? How are you coping with that? So all of a sudden you've got people, the job's going well, but heavier restrictions are put in a geographical area. What impact is that having on you?
Well, we have had that actually in Leicester, for example, and a few other places. But we ask a lot of questions from day one before we obviously go to site and just check people's happiness with us visiting. And at one point, we had about 1,000 jobs actually on hold, not for any reason other than people were too concerned or were shielding or whatever they were doing to have anybody in their homes. That's now down to zero. We've got nobody actually who's sort of stopping that, which is interesting. But we always make sure that social distancing is happening, and we sort of say to technicians, listen, if you feel uncomfortable on site because people are looking over your shoulder while you're getting on with things, then obviously take the bull by the horns and say, please, can you give me some distance? And if you can't, then I'm going to have to leave site. But generally, the jobs have all been progressing, and people have been very understanding and very reasonable, and been very honest as well about telling us if they're not okay for us to visit. So things are generally going on with in a very sort of grown-up way, to be honest.
A few weeks ago, Ian, you weren't, but a few other people were talking about COVID grumpiness and people now sort of putting pressure on getting things through. So how's the process coping with it? Given that we all know there's room for improvement in the claims process at the best of times, how's it coping with the uncertainty, the slight differences and the extra care that has to be put in place?
It's a challenge. I think the scenario being is that obviously what we try to do, we really do try to work really closely with our suppliers, just to make sure that we can understand any pinch points that might be cropping up. I think that the main issue that we have, and I think obviously it's, Chris and Jeremy have alluded to it as well, is that obviously within an insurer, obviously we're always looking at resource, and it's the throughput of claims, and that obviously would apply to our supply chain as well. So the difficulty here is that obviously, we've got 3 months of WIP that essentially stopped. And obviously then as we've got new claims that have actually then picked up again, they're obviously coming into the equation. And then following that, you then have 2 windstorm events and an increase in flood. So with regards to processes, that the processes are still there. They are still working quite nicely. But I think there are some difficult challenges at the moment. You obviously just mentioned with regards to, I think it was a question I just saw come up on the screen. We do work really closely with one of our suppliers with regards to vulnerable customers. And one of our concerns was obviously up until June, you could actually see that there was probably about 50 or 60% of the claims were on hold because of COVID. So we've actually seen probably within the last 8 weeks that there are no more delays. Those people are welcoming people into their properties to actually have the work done. And in addition to that, obviously, I've had a chat with our F&O guys who are on the front line just to see if there's any sort of kickback now coming, because as you know, we went into a soft, from the lockdown, we went into a soft opening, and obviously things are now beginning to turn again, and obviously there's a lot of quite negative information in the media at the moment, but at this particular stage, the customers are still okay to actually have tradesmen in their properties. So for us, with regards to the process is okay, the process is working. It's that 3 months of WIP that went nowhere that is having an impact at the moment.
Okay. From your perspective, Chris, then, are we going to? Do you think we're going to see some change over the coming days? Because the publicity that Ian's talking about is clearly showing data that the younger people are getting positive tested far more than other people, which may have a kickback in the older people like ourselves. He said, casually pushing you through in with me. Are going to remain a little bit tighter and perhaps just kind of withdraw a little bit again? Do you think that's the danger? And if that is the danger, how are you going to cope with it?
I think the danger is we've got extremes of attitude that we've not seen before. So if you take during the lockdown period, there was pretty much zero complaints. Complaints dropped off the radar from the point of view of people were just accepting of things. They were more worried about illness and catching the virus. So everything went extremely quiet. So you had this kind of strange that, whilst you carried on doing the job, whatever you did, nobody was complaining. And now we've gone to an extreme where complaint numbers, and I'd split that from the point of view of almost unjustified complaint numbers. I mean, I've seen a number recently where there's been a complaint. Nobody's done anything wrong, but it's just because people are at home and people have got time on their hands that they're chasing things that they wouldn't normally chase. So communication is becoming a massive thing, that you've almost got to over-communicate. You've got to tell people that you haven't got something to tell them, or they're on the phone asking, why haven't they heard any more? And I think you have got this difference between, it's more a general attitude from the point of view of what is happening with younger people, from the point of view of how they're reacting. And it's quite interesting what will happen. I mean, I know the government have brought out this new rule of 6, but whether young people will comply with it, because, I've got kids that are in their 20s and work in pubs and go out and about. And the truth of the matter is they're all just a bit sick, fed up with it, to be honest. And they just want to get on with their lives as normal. And then you've got the impact, of course, because if they're then coming into a house and someone gets the virus, the repairs stop, and that has a knock-on effect. So I think the answer to your question is we're going through a period of really strange attitudes by people, where all the things that we're used to and all the things that we can predict as to how people react aren't necessarily the case.
Yeah, no, I agree. Just a quick shout out then, Jamie. I'm going to make a shout out for our suppliers here and why they should be used. And I'm going to go a bit personal. Since over the last 4 weeks, I've had to have 2 tradespeople into the house. One like carpet and one to fix a boiler issue. Yeah, so these were straight tradesmen at the phone. At all times, I tasked them to go out and get a mask. There was absolutely no protection. And I'm relatively paranoid about it for family reasons. But we know that our suppliers are really good at this. So, more nervous if they are of the extreme, as Chris says, if they're of the extreme that wants to look after themselves and they're just using local contractors, then, there's a big risk, because believe me, the old suppliers I looked at here to do the work in my house were absolutely awful. You'd have thought we were on a summer holiday and it was happening. That's very different when I talk to suppliers. So is that a real big advantage that we have in the supply chain, Jeremy?
I'm sure all the people who work in the insurance industry try very hard to make sure that their people are first safe and their people sort of work safe as well. But it does come down to individuals, because a lot of these people are working on their own, aren't they? So you have to make sure that people don't get complacent in as colleagues as everywhere else. I mean, I'm sitting in the office today and we've got 75% of our people back in the office. We've got plenty of space to maintain social distance. But I mean, I must admit, I did a video yesterday to all the staff just to say, you need to call colleagues out, because it's too easy over time just to get a bit complacent. And however much you supply people with all the tools, with all the gloves, the masks, the washes, etc., and all the information, high-vis vests saying keep 2 meters away, all that kind of stuff, when we just get back into life, we just get a bit complacent, don't we? It's too easy to do. So we've got to constantly keep reminding people that they need to be careful of themselves, and by doing that, they'll be careful of others. So we try very hard, and I'm sure other people do too.
Yeah, I just think it's worth pointing out that the strenuous requirements we put on are generally met. To life cycles, are we getting claims closed very quickly, or are life cycles trailing off? All for understandable reasons, but ones that will continue for the foreseeable future anyway.
Yeah, I think this is a really difficult question. Just really going back to the last question, I think it's so vitally important that our suppliers try to get that message just down to grassroots, because I say we are having complaints coming through the system where our supply chains are going out, and as you say, it just could be the complacency, where somebody turns up at somebody's door and they're not wearing any face covering. So I think that is absolutely vitally important that we just keep that message going out, and just making sure that our supply chain are reminding that they're actual grassroots people that, yeah, they need to do that. Because as I say, when they approach a property and there's a 90-year-old widowed lady in there, and they just turn up without any sort of protection on, automatically that puts us on the back foot and actually causes some complaints going forward. With regards to life cycle, I just think it may be a little bit too early to make that decision. The problem we've got, and I say again, Chris and Jeremy have alluded to this, is that we've got this WIP, this actual 3-month WIP that's sitting there. So it really is skewing our figures. We know that probably going into June, everybody, ourselves and the supply chain were working on getting that WIP down, trying to make sure that if there's any work to be done, that was all being booked in, etc. And I say that was fine, that was going fine until we hit July. And then obviously we started to see some sort of weather-related claims coming through. So with regards to life cycles at the moment, what we're seeing is an increased life cycle, but I think we can put that quite clearly at the door of that WIP for that 3-month period when we was in lockdown.
Okay, Chris, what's your view? Because this is slightly different from your perspective, because there's a commercial aspect to WIP. It might be able to be recognised as revenue, but it's not money, it's not cash. So is there an increased WIP hanging in there, and what do you see as the balance between what Ian rightly pointed out, his pre-COVID claims, and just the difficulty in getting current ones through?
I think you need to split it between what I would call that 3-month WIP that Ian's talking about, which is or has been stuck, for various reasons, and general WIP that's not affected by that. We're finding that elapsed time on claims, more claims are being settled and are being settled quicker, and I think that is because of changes in process. More people working at home is actually proving to be more productive. I think we're also seeing changes in process from the point of view of the view by us and by insurers would have been that as a loss adjuster, everything has to be done external. But in actual fact, you're now splitting processes and taking your protections. It makes a lot more sense for somebody to inspect damage without the customer being there. And then if you need to take a statement or you need to speak to them, to do it remotely using video technology. And similarly, video technology has enabled us to speed things up, because that second visit where someone says they've discovered more damage, instead of having to arrange another visit, you can actually say, well, we can use video technology to do that. So the crisis has brought process improvements through, from that point of view. Elapsed time generally does depend on how quickly the repairs are being done. And there are a lot of factors. Jeremy's alluded to them. We found some tradesmen who have got less vehicles on the road because you can't get servicing done because there's backlogs in garages because of that side of it. And then you've also got material issues where you find that certain materials become difficult to get a hold of. There was a real problem getting hold of skips at one point, for example, which are quite important for trying to do a strip out on the premises. So you've got all those kind of material type things that start to have an impact. And then we're now starting to get, again, the dreaded word of Brexit and the concern from the point of view of what will that mean to the availability of certain things, and will that delay repairs? So lots of different factors are at play, but my general impression is that we've got better at pushing claims through the system and getting them settled quicker.
Okay, Jeremy, that's an issue I know you've discussed before and on the conferences, etc. Are you seeing a speeding of the process?
In some ways, and definitely some of the things that Chris said, I absolutely see that. I mean, without doubt, as Ian said, there's a I always call it like a snake swallowing a goat. Really, there was a big lump of claims that was in the middle there, which take a long time to get through the system, and those were absolutely influenced by not being able to get, Chris mentioned skips, but plasterboard, all those kind of things. Those factories shut, and you couldn't get them. So a lot of that building works was just not being done. It wasn't possible to be done, however many resources and people you had around. And then those people and those claims have to catch up. So those ones definitely took more time. I think we've used a lot of remote validation and self-service validation. We've got a bunch of insurer customers who've really sort of grabbed hold of that and said that's a really good thing to do, because customers, policyholders are crying out to say, well, I'm at home, I can actually do this stuff, I can take this video, just show me what to do, and we can make things happen faster. So I definitely support that. And generally now the claims we're seeing, I think, they're working fine. I think we've had some great cooperation from insurers to give us better information. I mean, Ian touched on vulnerable customers earlier. We've definitely seen better information about vulnerable customers over the past 6 months than we've ever had before. Maybe that's expected, but we didn't have it before, and it's much better now. which is great. But I think that generally we're back doing things as we were, but a bit quicker as an overall team. I guess one of the things I've banged on for a long time is that because we have this very disjointed supply chain approach in the UK, that everybody is employed almost to do a single service, you do get this handoff approach, and it is something that I think personally we can do better in the UK. But in the constraints of the system we have, I think it's doing pretty well, and we're getting paid better as well, I should say too.
Okay. Well, I think there's two things there, Ian, to pick up on, and the first one would be as we've seen some of these improvements, I think we can hang on to them in the industry if we go back to normal. Because there's always, in human behaviour, there's always a temptation to resort to type, isn't there? And secondly, from the supplier front, with furlough ending in a few weeks' time, still taxations to be paid back in loans, are we still worried about the future viability of some of the areas of the supply chain? You're on mute, Ian. You're the first person. You're the first person to do that today, because it's usually me. So that's and Jeremy, having given us a snake swallowing a goat. Jeremy, yeah. A good phrase for you being in mute as well.
Absolutely, I think it was that phrase. It just took me somewhere else at the end of the day. With regards to improvements, obviously, we're working with the supply chain, definitely. With regards to what we can do differently, how we can think outside of the box, etc. Going forward. So definitely, obviously, improvements. Digital technology obviously was involved some probably months ago now, obviously with regards to that, and what we can include in digital technology, especially with regards to doing remote validation. It's got to be a way forward, and I think it will be a way forward, and I really don't think that actually it's going to be missed or left out, because I just see that it's a way of just adding to the actual claims process, and then hopefully, if you've actually got a contractor on site, and he needs to do a variation and he needs an urgent instruction to do that, well, it can be done now in minutes, rather than, say, the old system or the old snail mail version of getting photographs and an email out and sits in somebody's post box, obviously, while they assess it. So you're probably looking around about 2 to 3 weeks, actually, before the builder sometimes got his instruction back, or any other supplier, to say what they wanted to do. So definitely the improvements are working well. They're going to be working well in the future. They're not going to be going anywhere. Obviously, the actual demographic of our customers, as I said beforehand, they're quite happy to actually utilise digital innovation that's actually coming through to actually do that process. Going forward, that is really such a difficult one, because will we go into a second lockdown? I don't think we can really afford that as a country. However, we have got furlough. Some suppliers have still got people on furlough because obviously they've got some sort of quite special niche product that they provide in the supply chain. What are they going to do after October, which I think is the end of October, that it actually formally stops? The only thing we can really do is that we just got to keep continuing to talk to our supply chain. That's all we can do. And we've said to our supply chain, don't wait. We don't want to find out something's wrong a month after something has gone wrong or some changes have been made. Talk to us. Let's see how we can work together as a partnership to actually resolve these issues. Our supply chain are just such an important part of the process. We can't ignore them. And I know in the past, obviously, they've really been slammed hard, obviously with fees, and obviously Jeremy and Chris would agree with me on that. You've got procurement, etc. But we're perhaps just in a different phase, and going forward, we just need to see what we can do, what technology we can use to actually make sure that it doesn't impact the life cycle, but indeed actually reduces the life cycle of a claim.
Do you think that from both the life cycle and perhaps even more from a procurement aspect, we will see procurement people beginning to look at procuring the process on a more linear basis than vertical basis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the scenario being is that, for decades now, we've had one way of dealing with the claim. Yeah, it's just been one way. And I think obviously as technology improves, we've actually got various ways. And obviously that's the quality of the supplier to be able to get back to the procurement to say, look, this is how we've done it. Well, if you want that sort of service, well, this is what it's going to cost you. But actually, there's all these other different pieces of technology out there that we can now utilize going forward. So actually, there's going to be a beneficial cost, probably. And obviously, there'll be a beneficial cost to the supply chain as well, especially about obviously trying to get out some resource. Having somebody on the road, I would have thought, and Chris would be able to provide a little bit more insight, but actually having somebody out on the road day in, day out, servicing these claims, I would anticipate if you can then bring in digital technology, there's going to be a saving to be made, which is beneficial to all.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Chris, over to you. I mean, that follow up from that on both fronts is the viability of some of the supply chain with some of the financial constraints that might be about to approach them. But generally, are you hopeful that a more linear approach to both the process and procurement can result from all of this?
Well, I think the two big things are, first of all, this will come to an end at some point, and hopefully the things that are good that have come out of it will continue, because there are some really good things that have come out. Jeremy hit on payment, and I think that has got a lot better. It's been a problem for years, and there's been huge improvements on it. We certainly had some clients who still insisted on paying us by cheque, which was somewhat problematical when their office and our offices were closed, and that's moved them on to BACS. We've had a change in attitude where there are people available, to look at outstanding debt slips and listen to them. So let's hope that continues, because that helps everybody. I think the other really big one, and I think it is video technology that's done it, there's a much more collaborative partnership type approach. It used to be really difficult to get a meeting with all the people that you need, because you can't all get them in the room at the same time and everything. But with video conferencing, you only need to do it for 20 minutes and you can get everybody that you need. And that has been happening, and that has given huge benefits. I guess my only one concern about how procurement takes it forward is what the attitude to the technology is. Because if the attitude is taken that the technology replaces all of the expertise, then we will just have a new problem. Because the fact is, video technology is a really good enabler, but you still need someone that knows what they're looking at, and you still need someone that knows what to do with what they're looking at. So from our point of view, yeah, it brings economies. If we don't have to send someone out 2, 3, 4 times, they only have to go out once. If we can, on the likes of Motor, take statements via video, there's definitely a cost implication. But my real hope, I guess, would be that we continue a partnership approach, and that we're sensible about the use of technology. Look at it as how does it help us, rather than how does it slash costs. Because the problem is, if you've got to look at things and controlling costs. I deliberately think controlling rather than slashing costs. Because if you look at technology solely from the point of view of, wow, we can save loads of money, generally you look at all the money you've lost on fraud, all the money you've lost on paying claims that weren't covered, all of those type of aspects. So my hope would really be sensible use of technology and sensible collaboration.
I think you make a very good point there, because believe me or not, as long as 4 years ago Jeremy Higham stood up at an ILC conference and said technology is great, it provides better customer service, it doesn't provide it. And I think exactly the point that you're making there, it's an enabler. Technology is an enabler to make things happen. That's something that we, up until now, I think have been slow to pick up on, but certainly, Chris, you're right, we've picked up on that really, really well recently. So we've heard what the insurer says, we've heard what the supplier stroke feeder out what does in the middle. Let's go down to the foot of the supply chain, if I can describe it as good a way. Jeremy, are all these things that Ian and Chris are saying are coming through, which you said are, do you really see them sticking in it? How big a help is that going to be for you to provide the service?
Yeah. I'm just trying to understand whether you just insulted me or not, but I'm not sure. But, I think technology means different things to different people, doesn't it? And a lot of that technology is pushed from the supply chain up to insurers, and there's where the ideas come from in a lot of cases to actually do things smarter, quicker, and better. Some of the technology we get from insurers tends to be the communication technology, which might be the system that they particularly want to use in order to integrate a supply chain or something like that. But I've always thought that's kind of a band-aid to make up for the fact that they're not really that integrated in the first place, because if they were all working together closely, then you wouldn't need to have lots of systems. The challenge for suppliers is that there is no consistency between insurers. So if you want to work with lots of insurers, you've got to work with lots of systems, and that can cause all sorts of cost issues for suppliers if it's not so easy to integrate or use APIs to make some of those systems talk to each other. But certainly some of the site-based stuff, video is an obvious one, but other bits of technology, eliminating visits by using remote monitoring of systems and things like that, things that we've been doing for a long time. People are more interested in listening to these days, not just from a cost point of view, but obviously from an environmental point of view. So I think there's lots of things to look at. I think the challenge is making sure that they all do add value. And I take Chris's point, it's not all about slash and burn on costs, because obviously one of the challenges that insurers in the UK, as I understand it, have always had is that they're often challenged on their own IT systems, and they find it very difficult to really look at true claim costs. They look at how much they spend, that's easy because they're invoices, but really saying how much did this claim cost, how long did it stay open for, what were the knock-on effects of this person taking or not taking this action, which ended up in that person going into alternative accommodation or whatever it happens to be. That's really hard to see anyway, and it's always been a challenge, I think.
I suppose, back to you, Ian, the other additional thing that we don't take into account when we look at, well, I haven't seen a lot of evidence of taking into account if we look to save claims costs, is if the process is better and we can make the supply and the whole process more efficient, in reality that means there should be less cost base within an insurer claims organisation. So if we get it right, the saving is throughout the system, isn't it? So you have to actually allow for progress in the economic effect that has internally within an insurer's cost, operating cost, let alone its claim cost.
Yeah, as I say, it's I've got my mic on this time, which is good. Yeah, it is. I think the scenario being is that what I try to do, and obviously what our supply chain try to do, is that when we obviously look at a cost, we look at the entire cost. Because I think, as Jeremy and Chris again alluded to, is that if you've actually got a supplier who's just given that first class service, with regard to communication with our customer, making sure that their expectations are met, actually a front end cost may be slightly higher, but the actual whole cost of the claim, which is obviously what we're looking at all the time, we're just looking at a very holistic approach. So I think that's obviously really important. So the entire incurred value is always going to be important, and it's basically how do each of the suppliers fit into that in order to make sure that we do keep our cost base under control. Like any insurer, pricing of our product is paramount, and we just need to make sure that when we're looking at frequency and severity, that making sure that obviously our price of our product's right, but also the end part of that process, which is the claim effectively, obviously because that actually does drive any costs of our policies, is great. So yeah, it is a holistic approach, and we do really try to look, from the point of us selling the policy to the actual point of us selling, obviously dealing with the claim, and life cycle. Life cycle is important. Bring life cycle down and obviously get life cycle under control. It's absolutely paramount, because obviously if you reduce the life cycle, you reduce costs right across the board. That's from the insurer and the supplier's perspective.
Yeah, so Chris, maybe this is like, and I mean, I guess you have to do this a lot. This is about getting the claim off accurately in the first place. So it's about having somebody experienced to make the early decision. If you make the early decision well, the progress of the claim should be good. But we still too often see claims that are set off on the wrong foot. And of course that starts recovery, and that just starts a whole quagmire of things going wrong. So how good are we at getting the front end of the claim right and getting it off to the beginning that will set it on the best route?
Again, it's got better, but I think we've got an awful lot to do. I think you've hit it right on the head from the point of view of, if you lose the trust at the outset of a claim, slow to make a decision, slow to take an action, then it impacts on the cost because you don't get reasonableness through the claim. I mean, one of the things that helps get elapsed time down a settlement claim is actually to make an early payment, because you build the customer's confidence that they see money can come through. I also take Jeremy's point of view that, and it's quite difficult to do it, but we tend to look at claims at just at the settlement value of what the claim was settled at. But of course, there's a cost of winning a customer and there's a cost of keeping a customer. And the fact is that if we can actually enhance the insurer's brand, and if we can actually enhance, then we can help build it. And we've seen examples of that, particularly on brokers where they've placed particular schemes where they've said because of the particular claim service or the particular suppliers involved. And it's quite often when you come into the pricing, because it's a discussion that I've often had when we're asked to meet a certain price, and I can say, yes, we can meet that, but you've got to look at what we've got to take out of the process and what the value of that is. So if the fact is, if you can bring our fee down and you bring the settlement, the claim down by an average of 10 quid, but you're actually losing 25% of your customers, what is the cost of that? And that's the bit, I think, things like Net Promoter Score and things like broker surveys and whatever are having an impact. We're seeing an improvement, but I still see situations where we'll get told, I'm sorry, we've decided to go with another supplier. We know they're not as good as you. We know we won't get as good an outcome, but they were 2.5% cheaper. So I do think we need to be a little bit smarter from the point of view of overall cost. And that applies to what we do as well. We talked about whether you go down a supply route. You've got to bear in mind, once you go down a supply route and once you put a repair contractor in, you give more points of potential complaint. If the customer uses their own contractor, they don't complain to you, they complain to the contractor. So in some ways, there are advantages to cash settlements, but quid pro quo that is you're not actually providing a service.
No. And suppliers aren't always easy to get if you're looking for them yourself out the yellow pages. Jeremy, I guess again back, these are good processes we talked about. When you've actually got to go out and deal with the property, and you alluded to this a minute ago, you're saying we're getting better information through insurers and that's making a difference. Is that a big difference that it makes? Does it really help get claim going properly and help you dealing with the policyholder?
Well, it's one of the things that we always talk about when we're sort of bringing new people into the business is if you get a claim from an insurer, sometimes you can get very scant information. You can say, it's a 1970s house, it's got 30 centimetres of water in it, and this is the name of the policyholder, and this was the incident date, and sometimes you don't get much more than that. And one of the things that we always say to people, you've got to play the ball at your feet, because actually if there's an elderly person in a wheelchair who lives on the ground floor only, or a young family in the one next door, for example, they're totally different solutions. So certainly getting decent information up front. Of course, we're trying to find out information ourselves when we call FNOL, but getting decent information up front informs what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and also sort of says, well, we're going to go to site and actually do stuff. We don't want to go to site and actually go with an iPad or something and just walk around and say, right, well, that's your damage. Somebody will be back a week on Tuesday, hopefully. Hopefully you can get out straight away when you've got decent information and do stuff on the first visit, which really sort of manages people's expectations and delivers on those expectations too.
I think the information is everything. That's one of the great we're seeing. Thank you all three of you for this. I think we might approach this subject again next month and see what's happening, what's changing. Certainly when we're looking at the ILC Home Claims Week from the 10th to the 13th of November, we're going to be taking a look at 2020. What's the experience? What have we learned? What have we improved? How can we take it forward? And that's certainly going to be talk of what we do. How will we cope? And sometimes if we stop and take a look at what has actually been achieved, it is phenomenal. I think we talked to a few people, both big and small companies. Companies as big as some of the loss adjusters, as small as some of the alternative accommodation companies, like A3 and Starkers, Martin Oldroyd, and we've talked with insurers. We had Brian Moore and everybody else talk about it, and you as well, Ian. We've been able to rehouse a whole staff of people from working at home quickly and still keep a service going to our policyholders. And I think one of the lessons that we surely have learned in this is we can actually move forward a lot quicker. Necessity may be the mother of invention, but it didn't have show us that in the insurance industry we can do things far quicker and better than we've done before. And I think that's one of the things we've really picked up and will hopefully continue to follow. Because certainly three of you have alluded to that very, very well today. I think you articulated it really well. Thanks very much to all three of you. It was terrific. Again, this is about claims people. It's your agendas. Let us know what you want to do. If you want more information, the building conference, give us a shout. If you want more information on the ILC Claims Week on the 10th to 13th of November, it's alan@iloveclaims.com. And commercially, if you want to look at some of the sponsorship issues that are there, it's Nick without a H, that's NIC at iloveclaims.com. We'll be delighted to help you. It'll be virtual, it'll be exciting, but we'll be back next week where I think, have a podcast next week. We're going to take a look at some of the things that we'll be discussing at the building conference on the 1st of October. So please tune into that. As always, thanks to our participants today. Thanks to everybody else. As we got reminded last night, and I say, COVID-19 is still out there, so please look after yourself, your businesses, your employees, and your families. And I look forward to speaking to you all next week. Thanks again, chaps.